So I'm going to ask the panelists one question to start, and then we have kind of 5 topics we're going to cover to wrap up the day. So the question for each of you is, can you let the audience know what is one thing you wish every church leader knew before they drew their first floor plan?
Before you draw your floor plans, in my opinion, you really need to sit down with the lending institution that you're trying to get your financing from and see what the requirements are. You need to talk to us on the front end versus on the back end. And that'll help you significantly moving forward with your project.
So I'm the capital fundraiser on this group. So you have the financial institutions on either side. So my perspective is this: you need clarity. You need to know what you're trying to accomplish, and that comes through unity and conversation. So starting first, before you make those blueprints and make those budgets, having clarity on what you're trying to accomplish is the starting point.
So buildings can amplify your ministry, but they can significantly amplify the strain upon your church and your congregation.
All right, so the 5 topics, thank you, we're going to be covering are vision and alignment, capacity and affordability, transparency and risk, roles and paths, and execution and closing. So the first topic, vision and alignment, we heard that echoed from Brad's first talk this morning, is really the why. So why are you doing this project, and is the congregation actually behind it? So Jessica, first question's for you. When a church is considering a building or renovation project, what is the first question they should ask themselves regarding why the project matters, and how does the why shape their ability to raise funds?
I was taking notes when Brad was talking because he was spot on. Do you remember he was talking about things in the master plan about buy-in, many participants, focus groups, conversations? This is not something where the leader on high says, go forth and do what I want. This is where the community comes together and refines with their vision what they're trying to do. And that buy-in and that engagement pays off so big when you start moving forward with the fundraising. Because this is not the top-down making a command. This is a community making a decision or answering a call. So that is where the why we're moving forward with clarity and we're doing it together, essential. Absolutely the essential starting point.
So building on that, how do we ensure that why has broad congregational support so future leaders aren't inheriting a burden they didn't help shape?
So I have worked with a number of churches where it becomes pretty evident that only the leadership is excited, and that's a real warning sign. So in some of the breakout sessions, a lot of talk about mission and vision, and I think those are great filters to put over your project and make sure what you have in mind fits your mission and your vision. And then I think once you have that, then broadly testing that alignment through focus groups, touching congregants in a number of different ways, feedback loops, because I think in the case where leadership was excited, congregation was not, they did not meet their goals in capital campaign, they weren't able to complete their project. So really starting with your congregation and working up, I think, is so important.
Second topic is capacity and affordability. So moving from the why to the how much. So Jessica, before a church starts talking numbers, what should leaders understand about their congregation's giving patterns and overall capacity to support a major project?
The rule of thumb is look over your last 3 years and your giving patterns. That's one of your key indicators on whether or not you have givers involved in your congregation who are going to, they already have ownership in your congregation, they're long-term repetitive givers, and 3 years is kind of your magic minimum. Of course, if you've got 20 and 40 years of given history, even better. But that's kind of the beginning point of sustainability for moving forward with a capital campaign conversation. The other thing, ABCs, do you have people in your congregation with the ability to give to a capital campaign? That's usually gonna come from their assets, not from their income. Their offering each week tends to come from their income, but their capital gifts are often gonna come from their assets. Do you have people with the ability to give? Do they believe in what you're doing? And that goes to what we were talking about, the unity building and having those conversations early. They wanna be a participant in building the plan and refining it and having conversations about it. They don't want to be presented with a plan that's de facto finished and just give me money for what I want to do. Is that clear on the difference in those two conversations? And then when you're looking at that capacity and you're looking at the alignment, are they already predisposed to give to what you're doing? So they have the ability, they have the belief, and they're predisposed to give to your cause.
Okay, Leigh, once we know the capacity, how do we determine if the church can truly afford the loan? What percentage of operating income should debt service consume? And can payments be made without assuming a field of dreams, optimistic growth?
So bankers and lenders love financial ratios, so I'm going to bore you for just a minute or two here. But churches should understand them. And I think Bennie talked about getting your lender in the room or lenders in the room early in the process. I think that's really important as you work on kind of what you can afford. But just a few ratios I'll share with you, and I'm happy to, if you want to email me, I can send you a kind of a church planning worksheet that we use. One is called debt service coverage ratio. This is basically your net income divided by your annual debt service. So obviously you want that to be at least 1-to-1, meaning that for every dollar you earn, at the end of the day, you have a dollar you can apply to your loan. But typically bankers want a cushion in that, so 1.25 times to 1. So for every $1.25 that you put on the bottom line after all your pledges and basket passes and all those things, you have no more than $1 of debt. So that's one ratio. That's probably the big one that banks look at. Debt service is a percentage of revenue. So typically this is calculated by your annual debt payments over your total annual giving. And typically want to see around 15%. Now that can vary wildly, but that's kind of a good benchmark there. Another one is loan to value. Although banks very rarely foreclose on a church for many reasons, they do want to understand that their loan is not the total value of the project. So they want you all to be able to have some skin in the game. And typically a good ratio there is 75% loan to value. So if it's $1 million project, $750,000 loan. Again, it can go on either side of that 75%. And then current ratio, which is really current assets over current liabilities. Current assets are basically cash or investments. So wanting just to make sure we all need a little savings, a little piggy bank, just making sure that you all have that. And a good current ratio is 1.5 times. So you have so if you have $1.50 for every dollar you have in current debt, you have $1.50 in ready-made assets. And then Jessica mentioned historical giving, so we're going to really look at last 3 to 5 years. A lot of times, amazingly, churches are faithful folks, and they think, or they believe, that if they build it, they can increase their revenue by a lot. And it's a little bit of a field of dreams thing, so understanding that can happen, but we also want to see, for not only for the bank's sake, but for the church's sake, that there is capacity to service this new debt without reaching for the stars.
Thank you, Leigh. Okay, Bennie, I'm going to put you on the spot with a couple questions. Sometimes there's high enthusiasm with a great plan, and banks sometimes still say no. Why would a church that has banked locally for years and never missed a payment still get their loan disapproved?
With the current financial environment that we are in, during the COVID time frame that we was faced with, your big banks, your Bank of America's, Wells Fargo's, Chase, et cetera, they got nervous because some churches throughout the United States could not make their mortgage payments. So that behooves the big box lenders to pull out of the church lending business. As you can see now, you banking with your local bank, your big box bank, you've been banking with them for years, and all of a sudden you go in to borrow some money for a new construction project or whatever the project may be, and they tell you no. And so that puts the church or the congregation in a situation where they are scrambling, looking for funding. And they cannot find the funding, have never missed a payment with the local bank. So that's where we come in or get involved. Like Leigh, community banks are great resources to start with at the local level. And if you cannot get a positive answer or response from the local or community banks that you in your community, then the churches or the congregation comes to us. And the secondary lenders are willing to take risk to give you the funding that you need, provided, as Leigh said, some of the debt-to-income ratio and things of that nature. But you got to think like the lender. You'll be amazed how many leaders come to us. Well, my church is valued at $7 million. I need a $2 million loan. That doesn't really mean nothing to the lender because it's not based on your credit score. It's based on the assets of tithes and offerings. That's what we're looking at. How much assets or money you have in the bank. That's what gets their attention, and you gotta focus on how they think, not how you think. And I have to kind of turn that around with the leaders of the congregation. We gotta follow the lender's guidelines. And if you can follow the lender guidelines, which are not complex, you can get a loan. It's kind of that simple, but we have to spearhead and get you going in the right direction with our secondary lenders that we work with.
Well, you went ahead and answered the second question, so that was good, Benny, thank you.
Oh.
Which is great, yeah. Touching on your credit score and why that's not always the answer. Yeah. So we're going to move on to our third topic, which is transparency and risk. Focusing on the health of the organization during the building campaign. Jessica, this one's for you. What does healthy, transparent communication look like during a building campaign, and why is it so critical for fundraising success?
I'm going to start with two things I've already heard in the room, and that was, should we staff up? I heard that question here. Should we hire more staff? And that is actually part of a feasibility study in preparing for a capital campaign. That is different from the feasibility study in which they're looking at your building and your lot and trying to decide, can we build what we want? With a capital campaign, that feasibility says, can we raise the money we need to raise? And that is not just about, do we have people who can give us $3 million. It's about, can our staff support this? Because it's going to take a large chunk of their time. Can our systems support this? Can our givers give that? So a feasibility study is a comprehensive look at the capacity to do a capital campaign. So staffing up is a legitimate thing. You want to take care of your people. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And you've got to be thinking in the long term what you're going to do for the health of your congregation. You're going to think about the long-term health of your people while you're concurrently building the ark, right? And so that is a big part of the calculus that sometimes goes unnoticed.
Leigh, so talking about risk management and why that's part of transparency, do you find that churches will investigate how it will pay the loan if attendance drops, a major donor leaves, or the church faces unexpected expenses?
So many churches do plan for that, and some don't. I can say In my career of church lending, I have had congregational schisms. I've had a pastor leave in the middle of the night, never to return. And I've had some flooding. So I've had a lot of biblical events, I think, in my church lending. I think the importance for church and its leadership is to ask the questions, what if? And again, going back to being faithful and largely optimistic, risk assessment is an act of stewardship. It's not an act of fear. So it's very appropriate to ask the questions, the what if questions.
Okay, Bennie, so even when we've done all these things and everything is transparent, why do things feel like they take so long? Why does a lender take sometimes over 90 days to approve a loan?
Well, for various reasons. Lenders want to do their due diligence. They're going to be like an investigator with the church, the congregation leadership. All of that's going to come into question. And it's nothing negative. It's just they want to know and feel comfortable when they lend in this money for this project that you're going to be able to pay it back. And not only that, one of the big areas that I see as a problem or can be a problem, the contractor. You got a project you putting together, you use an XYZ contractor, all of a sudden the lender wants to do an investigation on the contractor. They're going to go and pull files or records from the state and see what kind of violations, if there are any, on that contractor, any kind of complaints on that contractor. And if there are, the lender say, hey, we don't want you to use that contractor. He had some violations in the past. He did not finish the project on time. But some leaders, they stand adamant that they want to use this contractor. And if that's the case, you're not going to get the loan. That's what it's going to come down to. And that's why it takes time for us to, the lender, to do their due diligence as far as investigation. We run into appraisal issues that has to be rectified. Sometimes no problem with the appraisal. And then sometimes there are problems, and they want the problem corrected before they approve the transaction. So that's why we run into these bumps in the road, I call them sometimes, and it takes longer than anticipated for the lender to feel comfortable and for them to do their due diligence research before they approve the congregation for the loan. Thank
you, Bennie. Fourth topic is our roles and paths. What are the practical steps to getting the project moving? So Jessica, who needs to be at the table for a successful fundraising effort? And what roles specifically do pastors, board members, and campaign chairs play?
I got my notes out on this because it's so important to have the key players pulled together. Of course, your pastor is providing your leadership, your strategic vision, but he's got to have a council. And if that's your parish council or that's your deacons, I know it can look a little different depending on your denomination, or maybe you formed a specific committee just to focus on this. You need those people who are going to be your wise counsel. They're going to go out and find the information for you. And then you're going to need your congregation. They're going to turn into your ambassadors for this project. So really there's 3 tiers of involvement, but they're each so essential. You don't want the pastor out there trying to do this by himself. It's too much for one man to carry or one woman to carry. You do not want the deacons running off doing this all by themselves, because they aren't the whole congregation. And you don't want the congregation going off and doing this by themselves because they're not the leadership and they're not the wise counsel. So it really takes all 3 of those roles to make a capital campaign successful and to make a capital project successful.
Okay, and in the interest of time, wanting to get everybody out of here, I'm going to just jump a minute to a different question for Leigh. Beyond a traditional loan, should a church explore other funding paths such as capital campaigns, phased construction, grant funding, or repurposing assets?
And the answer to that is absolutely. Anything you can do to reduce the debt load on your church makes great sense. I had church years ago that was planning a new church on a new piece of property. They had a parsonage, which was no longer being used, sitting on 10 acres, and they hadn't thought about it, but they were able to liquidate that, and that was a big chunk of money. So just kind of thinking outside of the box. Obviously, capital campaign is a big one that we all know of. There are grants out there that you can pursue that are, if you can get those, that's found money. And going back to the capital campaigns, what's great is even if your pledges are spread out over 5 or 6 years, you can, as those come in, you can pay your loan down. And then at a certain point, you can just tell the bank, hey, we paid it down way ahead of schedule. Can we recast our payments for the future? So they'll take that loan and recast and lower your payments so that the burden on you moving forward is much less. So that's a great way to do that as well.
All right, and last but not least, execution and closing. So how do we finalize the deal? And we all need a plan B. Bennie, I'm going to jump to you with a couple questions on this. Is it the right move for a finance board to demand to approve the commitment before accepting the loan? And if a leader has already promised the congregation a new building, but the loan is denied, what is the next move?
Pray.
Pray.
The question she's asking is, I try to be in the real world of reality, and these are things that I've been faced with in the past. And the church or the congregation may have a capital improvement campaign, new construction campaign, whatever, but the pastor has not really got a green light from the board. They are in question if we should move forward with this project. And when you come to me for the loan, all of that needs to be worked out. Because when we give you the green light that the loan is approved, and then the pastor comes back to me or to the lender and say, well, the board members are not on board with it, we got a problem. All of that needs to be worked out before we even say you've got the green light to even move forward with the project. Because that is not my responsibility or my job to get involved with the church leadership before you come to me if you're going to get approval or want approval for the loan. So get all that worked out. I mean, I got one right here locally, February. The pastor and the leadership, they in squabbles about the loan. I can't help them with that. The loan is ready to go, approved on a refinancing loan, matter of fact, and they squabbling about signing the dotted line for the loan. I can't help them with that. Next question was, that's a good one. The pastor, the leadership stands in front of the congregation. We're going to move forward with a project, a renovation project, new construction project. Don't even know if they can get the funding for the project. That's not good. So all of that needs to be worked out for us during the pre-planning on the front end to ensure that you can get the funding for your project. Because when you stand in front of that congregation, they looking at you saying, we're going to move out on this project. You can talk to Jessica about raising funds for the project, and you can't get the project approved. I got a pastor in Miami, Florida. They told the congregation they're going to add a family life center onto the church. They did all their due diligence, all their planning. Can't get approved for the loan. And they already start digging, moving, shoveling dirt and everything. Wow. So I say, we got a problem. You got a big problem. You should have came to us on the front end before you stand in front of that congregation saying what you're going to do. Now we can't do it. But the lender is trying to work with them to come up with solutions to get them approved to move the project forward. And it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen the way they want it to happen. That's the problem. So if the pastor, which is very cooperative, they are doing what we're asking them to do to get the loan approved, because now they got the city, hey, you got a big eyesore now, and we don't have all the funding to complete the project. So get everything done on the front end and pray.
And on the praying note, I'm going to open it up now to wrap us up for the last 15 minutes or so. If there's any questions of this panel, or if Amanda would like to come up, if there's any other. Pete, I saw your hand first.
What would a church have to do to acquire subprime lending?
That's a great question. I had a church this month want a subprime loan. And I asked the question, why do you want a subprime loan? Well, we need the money like yesterday. We want to move, we want this and that. I said, well, why do you need the funds for a subprime loan? He couldn't give me an answer. And my spirit told me, leave it alone. I don't really get involved with that unless I can get all the upfront information that I need, because sometimes you don't need a subprime loan. We can do it the traditional way, but I didn't want to get involved with that because I got involved with one like that before, and it turned out to be a nightmare at the end.
Do you have anything to add about subprime loans?
Pete, were you talking about how does a church get a loan that's very favorable interest rate wise? Is that what you?
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't happen, no. No, it's like, a church loan is like any other loan, and the competitiveness of the interest rate is gonna really be based on how strong the church is, how big it is, how long they've been around, their capacity to repay, their liquidity, all those things. So if all that is really strong, then the interest rate's gonna be really strong. It really comes back to risk for the bank. If it's a riskier loan, they've got to price in a premium for that risk. If it's a less risky loan, then they can expect banks to be falling over themselves and giving their best rates. Does that help?
Thought I saw, yes, ma'am. One more hand, yeah? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It sounded like there wasn't a HELOC type of opportunity for church loans, but you did make mention of a refinance. If we have an existing loan that's coming towards the end of its loan life and we have equity in our property, is there a program that is offered to churches where they can pull from their equity so they're not taking out a new loan, like a HELOC for like a home buyer?
Take that. So certainly churches would be eligible for a line of credit secured by the equity in their real estate. So that's certainly an opportunity. Typically, those lines of credit, which are revolving like a credit card, have a variable interest rate. So if you have a project that you know you need to fund, it probably makes more sense to do a second mortgage so you can have a fixed rate and a fixed payment. But if it's a shorter term project, or you just want some like a rainy day fund, if the roof caves in or something and you need funds quickly, then you could appeal to that line of credit. I think on an individual basis, we're all encouraged to have home equity lines as an emergency. Same thing could apply to churches. Does that help?
Yes, so for a new building, that probably wouldn't be the way to go.
No, on a new building, you're going to have a construction loan, which is interest only, withdrawals as the construction progresses, and then when you're done, you'll have a permanent mortgage with monthly principal and interest payments on a fixed rate.
I thought I saw, yes, one more
Yeah,
hand.
just a question about what are the sort of practical advice about the duration of the loan, the loan term, the number of years, minimums, maximums.
Recommended or variables with that?
What's standard? What's best?
We can do a 25, 30-year loan, but most lenders want to take a look at that loan every 5 years. They want to look at it. but that doesn't mean you have to refinance it or anything of that nature. They can continue just to renew it and keep it moving forward. It all depends on your situation, the strength of the church, the financing, and things of that nature. But I do know in the past, some churches, they have to refinance these loans every 5 years, do a new appraisal every 5 years. So it's kind of like they're stuck in a cycle and they can't get out of it. That's why you have to take a look at a little bit of everything and see who can offer you the best financial scenario based on what you're trying to accomplish.
Should I turn it off?
No, you're good.
I hit a button, I was panicked a little bit. So I agree with Benny. Typically, we're doing up to 25 years for our church loans. One of the nice things, at least at our bank, is we will do a 25-year term, so there's no balloon note, so you don't have to refinance. We will reset the payments periodically, because as a bank, we can't set a fixed 25-year term loan with deposit rates going up and down, fluctuating like they do, but we don't have to get reappraised, don't have to get reapproved, but your interest rate will adjust on a certain set period of time.
Yeah, and I think one more question here. Yes, sir.
I think this is for Leigh. You suggested a reluctance to foreclose on churches, which I can certainly understand from a press release kind of point of view. Does that suggest, though, that you might do more due diligence in belonging to a church?
Yeah, the question was, since banks are reluctant to foreclose on a church for obvious reasons, does that make the due diligence as we look at church loans more acute? And the answer is yes. So we do take that, because that's typically if we're financing a commercial office building, ultimately the last source of repayment is to foreclose on that building and to sell it and get some of our loan back. On a church, that is much tougher to do and be able to hold your head up in the community and say you're a good community bank, right? So we do take a look at, again, all those things we've talked about, longevity of the church, the giving, age of the givers, all those things. So we do look at it, but it's a balancing act, but again, talking about a great thing to support the community is a church loan, so we love doing it.
Can I see? I just want to say one thing right quick. If a church falls in a financial situation, cannot make the mortgage payment, call the lender, sit down with the lender. As Leigh said, they are not in the business to foreclose on a church. More lenders will work with the church. We know things happen in the economy. So just call the lender. You'll be amazed how many pastors will not call the lender in tough situations.
All right. Oh, Tom, one more question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Leigh, if I were coming to you and saying, I want to build an office building for an architectural practice, you would underwrite that loan, you would do your due diligence, you would probably ask me for a personal guarantee if I was the owner of the business, right? How do you deal with that with churches?
So the question was, on a typical small business loan, as a bank, we're going to have a personal guarantee from the principal of that business. So that basically says if the business is not able to make the payment, we can pursue payment from the business owner. On a church, we typically don't have guarantors because it's for all the reasons that we wouldn't have guarantors. So again, that's probably, to Tom's point, that's another reason where you really have to understand the church and its solvency and its ability to fundraise and capital fundraise, all those things. So that's just another reason that a church loan, not a challenge, but it's a little more unique. Did I answer it?
I just want to say the lenders we work with, loans under $1 million, no guarantors. Over $1 million, we require a guarantor on the loans.
All right, can we just give our panelists here a round of applause? Thank you.